Two key deceptions that have taken over the thinking of most of the human race today are deep time and evolution. These deceptions assert that Earth is unimaginably old and that during this immense span of time, somehow lifeless, inanimate matter has evolved into people. In Genesis 7, it says, "And the waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left and those who were with him in the ark. And the water prevailed on the earth 150 days." In today's culture, a wide swath of people regard the Genesis flood as nothing more than a quaint myth. Yet the physical evidence from Earth's rock record cries out otherwise. These rock layers testify clearly to a global cataclysm beyond what the human mind can possibly imagine. If such a total destruction of land-dwelling, air-breathing life on Earth has truly occurred as Genesis describes, just what sort of physical evidence would such a cataclysm have left behind? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the Earth. It's been taught for a long time, both in school and in the popular media, that fossilization occurs by slowly burying a dead creature. Its soft tissues completely rot away, and its hard bony parts are slowly replaced with minerals. However, observations are being made that show this isn't the case. For example, discoveries of soft tissue in fossils. The problem with finding soft tissue like skin, collagen, and blood vessels, as has been happening in the last couple of decades, is that animals don't just lay around waiting for sediments to slowly cover them, allowing for fossilization. When an animal or plant dies, decomposition is very rapid. It's a necessary part of an ecosystem to make the materials available to the next generation. Predators and scavengers will first feed on the fleshy parts of the body, and bacteria and fungi, the decomposers, are responsible for breaking down most of what remains. And then chemical reactions like oxidation make short work of anything left. Only rapid and massive burial by sediments is sufficient to slow decomposition and allow for fossilization. For many fossils, it's clear the organisms were killed by the sedimentary flow that buried them. Once buried sufficiently by sediments, water infused with minerals must be present for mineralization to take place and preserve the bone or shell as a fossil. To reiterate, for something to be fossilized, it must be buried quickly before it can be scavenged or decayed away. Grand Canyon provides a representative glimpse of the sediment layers that blanket most of the continents. These layers document global cataclysm in an overwhelming and undeniable way. Layers consist of sediment particles of sand, silt, clay, and carbonate that have been suspended, transported, and deposited by moving water. They commonly continue for hundreds to thousands of kilometers in all directions. This implies that the water processes responsible were enormous on a physical scale. Layers above a global scale discontinuity called the Great Unconformity consistently contain fossils. The abrupt appearance of fossils at that erosional discontinuity is referred to as the Cambrian explosion. This vertical sequence of layers commonly displays flat boundaries between the layers with little or no erosional channeling across layer boundaries. The implications of these observations are profound. To deposit such uniform, horizontally extensive layers with flat boundaries between them requires that vast portions of the continental surface were flooded by rapidly moving water, and that the surface was nearly smooth, and that the water's speed had to be high to keep sediment particles in suspension over such great distances. These observations imply a regime of erosion, transport, and deposition in the past that was radically different from today. Today, higher portions of the continental surface are deeply sculpted by erosional channels. Sedimentation is generally severely restricted in lateral extent. In most settings, layering is entirely destroyed by burrowing organisms. This is called bioturbation. Bryce Canyon, Zion Canyon, and Grand Canyon illustrate the dramatic erosional channeling that slices into the modern continental surface. There's abundant physical evidence within the layers themselves that water velocities responsible for their deposition were extreme. In several cases, water velocities were sufficient to produce underwater sand dunes 50 to 100 feet high. Navajo sandstone, for instance, displays giant crossbeds, a certain indicator of high-speed water flow. The finer structure corresponds to layers deposited on the front sides of huge underwater sand dunes produced by high-speed water flow. Because fossilization requires rapid and complete burial, fossils are a reliable indicator of catastrophic conditions, including high water speed. Are the processes responsible for these striking features of the layered fossil-bearing sediment record prevalent today? No. Therefore, the premise of Charles Lyell's book, Principles of Geology, that the present is the key to the past, is invalid. The evidence reveals that the geological community has been wandering in the weeds for the past 190 years. The only place within the biblical account of world history where the formation of such laterally extensive fossil-bearing sediment layers could have occurred is, of course, during the Genesis flood. The text of Genesis reveals that this cataclysm unfolded within the span of only a single year. Given the biblical timescale and the striking physical evidence for a global flood cataclysm, some obvious issues come to mind. At a very basic level, how could so much physical geological change occur in such a brief span of time? And more specifically, what was the primary causal mechanism? Some major answers relating to these questions have come from the ocean bottom. This is a Mercator projection of the whole globe. The oceans are generally dark blue, but there are lines of light blue. Those are mountain chains on the seafloor that extend all the way around the globe. It is believed those may show where the fountains of the deep broke up. A couple of huge discoveries were made in the 1960s. All of today's basaltic oceanic crust has been formed recently in Earth's history. All of it is younger than most of the continental fossil-bearing sediment record. This line at the bottom of the blue layers represents the Great Unconformity. Everything above this level was deposited during the year of the Genesis flood. All of the igneous ocean crust on Earth today formed since the deposition of the Kaibab limestone. This means that all of today's ocean crust has formed after the onset of the flood and after a substantial portion of the sedimentary layers were deposited on the continents. The fact that the entire oceanic crust was formed after so much sediment was deposited on the continents implies that the opening of the entire Atlantic Ocean occurred during the flood, and also that continents migrated by thousands of kilometers in only a few months' time. The entire pre-flood ocean floor is missing from Earth's surface today. Taking clues from today's seafloor, it almost certainly must have been recycled into Earth's interior during the flood. These premises lead to the conclusion that rapid, large-scale tectonic change must have been a fundamental aspect of the Genesis flood. This has led to an understanding that has come to be known as catastrophic plate tectonics, or CPT. Geophysicist Dr. John Baumgardner first presented this concept at the first International Conference on Creationism in Pittsburgh in 1986. Such large-scale tectonic change at Earth's surface requires that Earth's interior also had to have been involved in a profound way, One of the questions at the time was about what mechanism could have caused such massive global upheaval. Several mechanisms had been proposed by the mid-80s, including meteorite impacts, tidal effects from close encounters with large asteroids, rapid radiogenic heating within the Earth, that's heating caused by the decay of radioactive elements, Earth expansion caused by changes in the electrical permittivity. That's the idea that a change in the strength of forces inside atoms caused them to expand slightly, which would cause Earth to also expand, and many others that were not specifically listed. Dr. Baumgartner believes that a critical clue to identifying the mechanism can be found in the large-scale tectonic changes that occurred during the flood and in the period since then. The Earth has three main layers: the crust, the mantle, and the core. The mantle is composed mostly of solid silicate rock, while the core is made primarily of iron and nickel, with a liquid outer core and a solid inner core. The outermost rigid layer is the lithosphere, which consists of the crust and the uppermost mantle. It is broken into about a dozen major tectonic plates. Beneath the lithosphere lies the asthenosphere, a weaker, ductile region of the upper mantle that allows the plates to move over it. The ocean plate's lower temperature makes it denser than the asthenosphere beneath, so it is gravitationally unstable. In other words, it has a tendency to sink or subduct. The continental crust is buoyant, so it does not subduct. It floats like a cork on the mantle. When I was in school, we were told that the sedimentary layers on the continents were deposited when the continents sank down below sea level, and then they later rose up again. One of the things that I remember being taught about how this happens is that as more sediment is added on top of the continents, it causes them to sink. I hope that's not still being taught because it's wrong. A cork won't sink in water unless you push it down. You can try this with cork hot mats. Try setting one in a tub of water and then stacking more hot mats on top of it. The top of the stack will never be underwater unless you push it down. Another problem with this explanation is that the continents have to be underwater to begin with before more sediment can be added, but it doesn't say how that happened. Blue ocean crust forms at a mid-ocean ridge where plates are moving apart. Molten basalt rises into the gap between the plates and solidifies to form new ocean crust. A paper published in 2013 reported on deep-sea drilling core samples in which the scientists found a systematic change in chemistry from the edge of the continents to the middle of the ocean. The changes in chemistry were linked to the temperature of the mantle that generated the oceanic crust. The evidence showed that Earth's mantle may have been up to 150 degrees Celsius hotter than today, when the Atlantic Ocean began to form. The same paper also mentioned that the average ocean ridge depth today is about 2.9 kilometers below sea level. The scientists calculated that the ridges above the hotter mantle in the past would have been only about 1 kilometer below sea level. What we see in this diagram is that the ridges are the high points. That's because they're made of new, hotter, less dense material. As the material cools, it becomes denser and begins to sink and be pushed away by new material still being erupted at the ridge. This is called ridge push. The oceanic crust gets older and denser as you go from the ridge to where it subducts beneath a continental plate. In the subduction zone, the oceanic plate is drawn down by gravity. This is called slab pull. Ridge push and slab pull create a sort of conveyor belt effect in the ocean floor. Catastrophic plate tectonics is similar to conventional plate tectonics, except that the plate velocities are about 1 billion times faster, about 5 miles per hour instead of 2 inches per year. Laboratory experiments show that mantle rock weakens dramatically under stress. This weakening is what provides the potential for a runaway catastrophe. Catastrophic plate tectonics, like conventional plate tectonics, accounts for mid-ocean ridges, deep ocean trenches, volcanism adjacent to trenches, and the global distribution of earthquakes. There are, however, some geological processes distinctive to catastrophic plate tectonics, such as supersonic steam jets emerging from the seafloor along 40,000 miles of rapidly spreading mid-ocean rift zones. The crucial physics issue is this: how can ocean plates sink vertically through 2,900 kilometers of mantle rock in a few weeks' time? The answer is catastrophic plate tectonics. Ocean plates can slide into the mantle and sink because they are cooler and denser than the mantle rock beneath. Rapid plate motion can occur because the mantle rock weakens under stress. When geophysicists say that the mantle weakens, they mean that its viscosity decreases so it flows more easily, and its strength decreases so it takes less stress to deform it. There are a few things that can weaken mantle rock, but the main one is strain or damage. This would have happened when the oceanic plates first began to subduct when the fountains of the deep broke up. As stress is applied, the rock accumulates strain. In other words, it deforms, which changes the rock's internal structure, making it weaker. The weakened areas concentrate deformation into narrow regions that act like lubricated channels for flow. The oceanic crust would have also carried some water with it, which would cause the crystals in the rock to move more easily and make the rock softer and easier to deform. This would have lubricated the mantle rock around the subducting slabs, causing the slabs to sink faster. To sum this up, the mantle would have started to deform under stress as the oceanic plates first began to sink. That deformation would have produced heat, making the rock softer. Softer rock deforms even faster, and faster deformation makes more heat, causing runaway subduction. Then once the original dense oceanic plates were fully subducted, there wasn't enough temperature and density difference for the process to continue. So the runaway subduction slowed down dramatically. It's been slowing down ever since. That's why we don't see runaway subduction today. This image shows areas deep in Earth's mantle identified using seismic tomography. The red areas are vast regions near the core mantle boundary where seismic shear waves travel more slowly than in the surrounding mantle, and the blue areas are where the waves travel faster. This is interpreted as differences in temperature, composition, or both. Seismic waves spread in all directions from an earthquake hypocenter, where the earthquake starts below the surface. The speed at which the wave travels depends on the type of wave and the density, temperature, and elasticity of the material it travels through. By recording how long seismic waves take to travel to different locations around the world, scientists can identify variations in wave speed and use them to construct three-dimensional images of Earth's interior like this one. The tectonic plates are cooler and denser than the mantle, and the oceanic plates have been visualized as slabs sinking into the interior at subduction zones. Geophysicists have found blobs of material near the core mantle boundary that are only about 1,000 degrees Celsius. That sounds hot, but most of the mantle is between 2,000 and 4,000 degrees Celsius. The cold blobs are also far away from plate boundaries. They're under oceans or under the interiors of continents. Many scientists believe these regions may be chunks of oceanic crust that subducted through the mantle to that depth. Creationists believe this happened quickly during the flood. Evolutionists don't have a universally accepted explanation for these regions. If they took millions or billions of years to sink that deep, mantle convection should have remixed and homogenized them, and we wouldn't see them now. One evolutionary suggestion is that convection is limited to the upper part of Earth's mantle. Another is that they are old rocks stuck in zones between convective currents. Some scientists now suggest that these may be the remains of the Mars-sized object called Theia, which they believe collided with Earth about 4.5 billion years ago in their account of how the Moon formed. But this still faces the same problem of mixing and homogenization over billions of years. In the young Earth creationist view, the small amount of heating in the colder regions is powerful evidence of an episode of runaway subduction in Earth's very recent past. These are three snapshots from a two-dimensional mantle runaway calculation in a box 11,500 kilometers wide by 2,890 kilometers high at 5, 12.5, and 20 days. The crucial physics underlying the runaway process is the weakening of the mantle minerals. The energy driving this process is just the gravitational potential energy associated with the initial temperature differences. Cold rock at the surface tends to sink. Hot rock in the mantle is more buoyant and tends to rise. One of the consequences of subduction involves how the oceanic and continental plates interact. You can see in this video how the plates can lock together, and then as the oceanic plate keeps going, it starts to bend the continental plate. It's believed that there was probably a Pangaea-like supercontinent before the flood. During the flood, mantle circulation caused by the sinking slabs all the way around the edges of the continent would have caused the middle to flex upward, while the edges pulled down. Combined with the mantle circulation caused by the subducting slabs, this probably tore the continent apart. Caused the flooding of the continents. We mentioned this earlier. Rapid replacement of cold, higher density ocean plate with hotter, less dense ocean plate adjacent to mid-ocean ridges caused the volume of the ocean basins to decrease, sea level to rise, and water to spill onto the continents. The seafloor near mid-ocean ridges is thousands of feet higher than the seafloor far from the ridges. Picture a swimming pool and imagine lifting the bottom. As the pool gets shallower, the water level rises until it comes over the side and all over the ground around the pool. What caused the floodwaters to recede? Many lines of evidence indicate that after the 150 days during which the waters prevailed on the earth, God caused the newly generated ocean plate to cool toward its present state. This cooling reduced the volume of the ocean floor rock, causing the ocean floor to subside and the global sea level to fall by some 1,500 feet. At the moment, we don't know how God cooled the ocean crust. It may have been supernatural, or there may be another explanation. That's an area of ongoing research. The rapid drop in sea level led to rapid runoff of water from the continents. Spectacular erosion is evident, especially in the upper layers, which were less lithified and softer. By what conceivable means was the huge volume of fossil-bearing sediment generated, transported, and deposited? The short answer is tens of thousands of megatsunamis. These were produced by the locking and unlocking of the rapidly subducting lithospheric plates, like we saw in the video a few slides back. Average sediment thickness over the continents today is about 1,800 meters. The thickest accumulations are on the continental shelves, where the blue and purple are shown on this map, the result of runoff during the final stages of the flood. A truly effective defense of the Genesis flood cries out for a reasonable explanation for how, in the span of only a few months' time, such a huge volume of fossil-bearing sediment came to blanket the continents in the orderly patterns we observe today. Large tsunamis can achieve that feat. How are tsunamis produced today? Earthquakes and ocean floor volcanoes can cause an upthrust that can displace a lot of water in a very short time, generating a massive amount of energy. That energy can cause the formation of a train of waves that propagates over the ocean surface. These waves can move as fast as 500 miles per hour. The wavelengths grow with the period between successive crests or troughs, varying from 5 minutes to more than an hour. As the waves approach shore, the bottom portion is slowed by the rising seabed. This causes the wavelengths to become shorter and the wave height to become higher, often to between 5 and 10 meters. But they can be higher. These waves cause massive damage as they collide with the shore, and then they cause even more damage as the water flows back off the land, uprooting trees and washing away people and property. This is an animation simulating the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami in Southeast Asia. A section of the Sunda megathrust ruptured over a length of 1,300 kilometers and caused a tsunami with waves up to 30 meters high that traveled up to 2 kilometers inland in many places. According to Wikipedia, that tsunami killed roughly 250,000 people in 14 countries. There is geological evidence of tsunamis in some parts of the world reaching 300 meters high. Imagine what would happen if every major fault in the oceans did that at the same time. At the Creation Research Society conference in 2025, Dr. Baumgardner presented new research showing that the tectonic upheaval during the Genesis flood may have generated a tsunami about every 1.5 minutes. As the waves washed onto shore, the previous waves would have been receding, and the overall result was to produce extensive horizontal layers across the continents. Another major discovery from the seafloor in the 1960s was the phenomenon of guyots, now known as table mounts. These are volcanic seamounts whose tops have been eroded flat by wave action. They are significant because they so clearly document the reality of extreme tsunami activity and a higher seafloor during the flood. There are approximately 50,000 seamounts or submerged extinct volcanoes in the Pacific Ocean. Many of these are flat-topped guyots. There are 283 known guyots in the world's oceans. This is a scan of the Bear Seamount in the northern Atlantic Ocean. You can see the flat top on it. During the flood, when the seafloor was rising, numerous volcanoes were forming. The tsunamis eroded the tops off of them, and then when the seafloor sank down again, these seamounts' tops fell below sea level. Rios affirmed the reality of ferocious tsunamis during the flood, and the fact that during the flood, the ocean basins were much shallower than they are today. So why is the issue of the flood and a solid defense of its reality so important today? The truthfulness of the Bible depends on it. The truthfulness and authenticity of Jesus depend on it. And the relevance of the gospel depends on it. So why did God flood the world? Well, we have to go back to the beginning to learn about that. Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created the universe and everything in it from nothing in 6 days. On the sixth day, he created all of the land animals and humans." Genesis 1:26-28 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Then he blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.'" He created one man and one woman, and they were created in God's image to be in relationship with him. Adam and Eve were given a perfect world to care for. They were given authority over the earth and everything living there, which suggests that they were expected to study earth and its creatures intently, and then apply that knowledge for the benefit of all and the glory of God. Adam and Eve were not created to be mindless puppets. God gave them the freedom to make their own decisions. This included giving them the freedom to choose to reject him. Genesis 1:31 says, "Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day." When God finished creating everything, including Adam and Eve, he declared everything very good. Adam and Eve had a perfect relationship with their Creator. There was no death, disease, or suffering. There was no fear between man and animals. The Creator met every emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual need they had. He only gave them one rule. Genesis 2:16 to 17 says, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." Adam was told not to eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but he did it anyway. The punishment for his disobedience was broken fellowship with God and eventual death. Genesis 3:17 to 19 says, Then to Adam he said, Because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Adam's disobedience was what God called sin, and because of this sin, the process of death began. Adam and Eve were also expelled from the Garden of Eden to keep them from eating the fruit from the tree of life and having to live forever separated from God. That would be hell. The Apostle Paul states in Romans 5:12 that death originally entered the world because of Adam's sin. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. Sin changed everything. It severed our relationship with God, and it brought pain, suffering, and death into the world. It affected all of humanity because we are all descended from Adam and Eve. The world we live in now is not the perfect world God created. Adam and Eve had lots of children besides Cain and Abel. I've heard there's a Jewish tradition that says they had 55 children, and those children had children, and so on. Before you go off about incest, there was no law against close relatives getting married in the beginning. Adam and Eve were perfect. One of the consequences of sin was that mutations would begin occurring in the genome. God didn't say that marriage between close relatives was wrong until he gave Moses the law for the Israelites. By that time, enough mutations had occurred in the genome that marriage between close relatives could cause some serious problems, because close relatives are more likely to have some of the same mutations. This increases the chances of those mutations being passed on to the offspring and amplified. Anyway, Adam and Eve had lots of descendants, and unfortunately many of them became wicked. After about 1,500 years of mankind becoming more and more sinful, God was sorry he had made mankind, but one man, Noah, still loved God. There was a global flood, and the sedimentary record is monumental evidence of this event. Reinterpreting these rocks otherwise has had devastating consequences because of what these stones mean. They are and were meant to be an everlasting reminder of God's hatred and judgment of sin. John 3:12, Jesus said, I have spoken to you of earthly things, and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things? If we can't trust what the Bible says about earthly historical matters like the flood, how can we trust what it says about spiritual matters like salvation? Matthew 24:37 to 39 says, For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Jesus put his stamp of approval on what Moses wrote. A robust defense of the flood is a strategic aspect of Christian apologetics today. It's essential for upholding biblical authority, and it's urgent for the task of taking back the ground lost after many decades of retreat on these fronts. Just as God provided Noah with a way to be saved from the coming judgment, he has provided us with a way to be saved through his Son Jesus. All he asks is that we repent of the sin in our lives, turn away from the things that separate us from God, and receive his forgiveness. Then it is our responsibility to serve him because we have been bought with his blood. As we wrap up, I want to point you to some excellent resources from the Creation Science Association of Alberta. The website is create.ab.ca. You can find a wide range of articles, books, DVDs, event information, and more. One resource I want to highlight is Head Start. You can find it by clicking the banner at the top of the web page. It's an online study tool designed especially for high school and post-secondary students. It explains key science terms and concepts that students encounter in biology, geology, and related fields, and it looks at them through a biblical and worldview-aware lens. It's very accessible and works well on phones and tablets. There is also a newsletter published 3 times a year called Creation Science Dialogue. It includes articles written at different levels, from introductory to more technical, so there's something there for students, educators, and anyone with an interest in science and faith. Finally, if you'd like to stay connected, you can sign up for the email list through the subscribe link on the homepage. That's the best way to receive new dialogue issues, announcements about events, and other updates. Thank you for listening.